There are stories that begin with a sound, not a voice, not a knock at the door, but something much softer, like the dry slide of a cardboard lid against its sleeve, or the faint scratch of dust beneath a fingertip. And honestly, that's exactly where this one begins. In a room that smelled of old paper and forgotten leather, with a man named Tariq near, who had absolutely no idea he was about to lose an entire week of sleep. Tariq was 38, an archival researcher with no special fame, hired by a private estate in Kent to catalogue a collection that had sat untouched since the death of its owner, a retired physician named Arthur Hallowell, who collected things without any clear pattern. African masks, German geological surveys, Japanese woodblock prints, and photographs. Thousands and thousands of photographs. On the third day of the inventory, a Thursday, Tariq found himself in the estate's attic storage room, a long, narrow space beneath the roof where the afternoon sun had trapped the heat. Atian turned it into something almost solid. He was working through a stack of shallow wooden boxes, each labeled in Hallowell's tight, sloping handwriting, and most contained exactly what you would expect. Family portraits, landscapes, a series of badly faded daguerreotypes showing the same spaniel in different poses, pictures of patients. Then he opened a box marked Macclesfield Studio 1905. Rejects. That word rejects stopped him. It suggested someone had made a choice. Someone had looked at these prints and decided they did not belong with the others. Inside, he found 6 cabinet cards, standard studio portraits from the Edwardian era. The black card mounts were brittle around the edges, and the photographs themselves had that warm sepia tone you get from albumen paper, aged more than a century. 5 of the 6 showed individual sitters. A woman in a high-collared dress, a young man with a center part and a collar too tight around his neck, an elderly woman with folded hands. Nothing. Unusual. He set each one aside, making notes on his tablet, the stylus tapping softly against the screen. The 6th photograph stopped him completely. It was a family portrait, a mother, a father, and 2 children. A boy of maybe 7, and a girl who looked around 4. The mother sat in a velvet armchair with the girl on her lap. The boy stood beside his father, who was positioned to the right side of the frame, one hand resting on his son's shoulder, the other held across his own chest. They were dressed formally, the way people dressed for studio portraits back then. The father's suit was dark wool, 3-piece, with a watch chain visible against the waistcoat. The mother wore a brooch at her throat. The children's expressions were serious, as if being photographed was a solemn and important event. Tariq almost passed right over it. He had seen hundreds of portraits just like it. The formula was so rigid it barely registered anymore, but something made him pause, a faint feeling of wrongness he couldn't name at first. He tilted the card toward the bare bulb hanging from the attic beam, letting the light slide across the surface. The father's face was unremarkable, a man in his mid-30s, dark hair combed back, a heavy mustache covering his upper lip. His posture was stiff but not unusually so. The mother's face looked soft, tired around the eyes, the face of a woman who had been awake with young children trying to stay still for the long exposure. The children were simply children. The boy had one sock slightly bunched at the ankle, but it was the father's hand that Tariq kept staring at, specifically the hand resting on the boy's shoulder, more specifically the fingers. He brought the photograph closer, squinting, and then did something he rarely did. He pulled out his phone and used the camera to magnify the image, zooming in until the hand filled the screen. And that was when he saw it. The father's hand had no thumb, not an amputated thumb, not a thumb tucked beneath the palm. None. The index finger emerged directly from the wrist, and where the thumb should have been, there was only the smooth curve of the hand's outer edge. 4 fingers, no thumb. Tariq blinked. He set the phone down and looked again with his naked eye. Same thing. He zoomed in further. The resolution was high enough, the original negative clearly sharp, and there was no sign of motion blur or damage to the print. He checked for a folded thumb, a strange angle. Nothing. The hand lay flat against the boy's shoulder, palm down, fingers slightly spread. A perfectly normal hand, except it lacked the single digit that defines a human hand. A chill moved across his shoulders despite the attic heat. He placed the photograph face down on the box lid and walked to the small round window at the end of the attic. Outside, the ground stretched green and silent in the afternoon light. A gardener pushed a wheelbarrow near the old greenhouse. Everything looked excellent, closely as it should. He returned to the photograph. He told himself there had to be an explanation, a defect in the negative, a trick of light. Early photography often created strange distortions. A hand moving during exposure might blur or even vanish. But the rest of the hand was perfectly sharp. The fingers, the knuckles, the faint shadow beneath the palm, all in focus. Only the thumb was gone, and not blurred gone as if it had never existed. He checked the other 5 photographs in the box, examining every visible hand, all normal. Thumbs exactly where they should be. He returned to the family portrait, studying the father's face, searching for something. A scar, a deformity, any clue to a congenital condition. But the face was symmetrical, ordinary, completely average. The mustache hid the upper lip, but that meant nothing. The eyes looked slightly left of the lens, common for the period. Nothing in that face hinted at anything unusual below it. Tariq turned the cabinet circa, odd over. On the back, written in pencil, someone had written, Merrin family, April 14th, 1905, Macclesfield Studio, Bridge Street. Below that, in different handwriting, a single word, unusable, not damaged, not spoiled. Unusable, as if someone had looked at the developed print and decided it could not be given to the family, could not be sold, could not even exist in the world. Tariq sat on the dusty attic floor, the photograph resting in his lap, the bare bulb swinging slightly overhead, although there was no draft. He became aware of his own breathing, too loud in the quiet room. In 16 years of archival work, he had handled documents that changed historical narratives. He had held letters written by people dead for centuries, but he had never felt what he felt at that moment. A deep irrational certainty that he had seen something he was never supposed to see. He photographed the portrait with his phone, then another image of the writing on the back. He returned the cabinet, card to its box, tucked the box under his arm, and descended the narrow attic stairs, his footsteps echoing. He walked to the small second-floor room the estate had assigned him as a workspace and locked the door behind him, something he never normally did. On his laptop, he started searching. Macclesfield Studio, Bridge Street, Macclesfield. The studio turned out to have been operated by a man named Cecil Royal, from 1898 to 1911. There was very little online. A mention in a local History Society newsletter, a single advertisement reproduced in a book about Victorian photography. C. Royal, photographer, portraits of distinction, families a specialty, Bridge Street, Macclesfield. He searched for the Merrin family. 1905, Macclesfield, nothing. He tried different spellings, Merton, Merrin, Martin. He widened the search to all of Cheshire, then the entire northwest of England. The name was too common, the records too incomplete. He closed the laptop and stared at the wall. Now here. What you need to understand about Tariq Anir. He was not a man given to wild imagination. His training was in archival science, a discipline built on patience and skepticism. You do not survive in that profession if you chase every strange detail. Most mysteries have ordinary explanations. Most anomalies are just gaps in the record, and filling those gaps is slow, unglamorous work. He believed that completely. He always had. But the thumb, or rather the absence of the thumb, was not a gap. It was a fact captured by light and fixed in silver halide on glass in 1905. A fact someone, probably Cecil Royal himself, had looked at and hidden away inside a box marked rejects. Tariq slept badly that night. He lay in the narrow bed of the cottage the estate provided for researchers, watching the curtain move gently in the breeze from the open window, and his thoughts kept returning to the father's hand. He imagined the family arriving at the studio, the mother settling into the Levitt chair, the boy standing proudly, the photographer ducking beneath the black cloth, removing the lens cap, counting the exposure. Then later, in the darkroom, the image appearing slowly through the developer, and the photographer's hands freezing when he saw what he had captured. Maybe he thought it was an error. Maybe he tried another plate, and another, and on every one the same thing. 4 fingers, no thumb. Or maybe he only took one photograph. Tariq turned onto his side, staring at the wall. A crack in the plaster stretched from ceiling to floor like a river branching across a map. He traced it with his eyes until sleep finally came. The next morning, He made breakfast and ate standing at the kitchen counter. Coffee, toast. He checked his phone. There was a message from the estate's managing solicitor, a Mrs. Pembroke, asking for an update on the inventory. He typed a short reply and then, after a pause, added a question. Did the estate contain any other material relate? D to the Macclesfield studio. Receipts, letters, correspondence, anything. The reply came an hour later. Mrs. Pembroke informed him that Dr. Hallowell's papers included several boxes of correspondence with local historical societies. He was welcome to examine them. They were stored in the library's lower cabinets. The estate library was a two-story room with a gallery and a fireplace large enough to stand inside. The lower cabinets were built into the walls beneath the bookshelves, their wood dark with age and polish. Tariq found the correspondence boxes easily, organized by year. He pulled the one labeled 1903 to 1906. Inside were dozens of letters. Dr. Hallowell had been meticulous, keeping copies of his own letters alongside replies. Most concerned his collections. Questions about a Benin bronze, a debate about a fossil found in Dorset, an argument over a supposed Turner sketch. Then near the bottom of the box, a letter dated September 17, 1964, typed on thin yellowed paper. The lead, T-Tear had read, Cheshire Historical Society. The text was short. Dear Dr. Hallowell, thank you for your inquiry regarding the Macclesfield studio. I regret to inform you that we hold very little material from that establishment. However, enclosed, please find a copy of a note from our archives which you may find relevant. It was discovered among the papers of the late Reverend Alistair Thorne, who served as vicar of St. Paul's Church, Macclesfield, from 1901 to 1923. Yours sincerely, Margaret Croft, archivist. Tariq turned the letter over. Clipped to the back was a photocopy of a handwritten note. The ink was pale, the writing hurried and cramped. Royal came to see me last night. He was in a state I have never seen in any man. He begged me to destroy the plate. He said the device had captured something that does not belong to God's creation. I counseled him to pray. He said prayer would not erase what the glass had seen. I do not know what he photographed in that studio, but I believe he spoke the truth. God preserve us. The plate, the glass plate negative. Cecil Royal had tried to destroy it. A vicar had written about it privately, and somehow a print survived, ending up hidden in Dr. Hallowell's attic among rejected photographs. Tariq read the note 3 more times. His coffee had gone cold beside him. The library remained silent except for the ticking of a clock above the mantel, and with sudden, terrible clarity he realized he had become part of the story. The note had been written in 1905, the photocopy made in 1964. And now, more than a century after the shutter clicked inside that Macclesfield studio, he was the one holding the evidence.